pushing through with his plans for 25% tariffs against Canadian goods has meant Donald Trump has more or less united Canada against him. A patriotic frenzy included booing the American national anthem at a basketball game in Toronto, a slew of counter-tariffs aimed at popular American imports such as beer, wine, chicken, vegetables, clothes and furniture, and in Ontario, the tearing up of a $100 million contract with Elon Musk's Starlink company. But what of Canada's head of state? Who is, yes, of course, our own King, Charles III. The British government may or may not try to stay neutral in Canada versus the US, but the monarch can't. It's all a bit rum. Let's talk now to Professor Robert Hazell, Professor of Government and Constitution at University College London. Professor Hazell, thank you very much indeed for joining me to talk about the King of Canada, something we don't normally talk about. How seriously do you think the King regards his head of stateship in Canada? How emotional is this for him? And therefore, how concerned will he be to see America and Canada at trade war loggerheads with each other?
I'm sure he takes it very seriously because, just like his mother, Queen Elizabeth, he's a very conscientious monarch. He's actually head of state of 14 other countries around the world, not just Canada, but places like Australia, New Zealand, Jamaica, and several other islands in the Caribbean. And he takes his duties very seriously as head of state of all those other places. And Canada is, I'm sure, very close to his heart because it's a country he's frequently visited, that was frequently visited also by Queen Elizabeth and by Prince Philip. And so he will be following this very closely. And I'm sure the Canadian government will equally be keeping him closely informed.
Well, it's an extraordinary place. It's got the longest land border, I think, in the world with America and a population considerably smaller than ours. So they must be feeling very vulnerable at the moment, and this intense patriotic feeling will be bubbling up. Do you think it's conceivable that the King will pick up the phone and talk to Keir Starmer about this?
No, he wouldn't talk to Keir Starmer about it because the palace tries to keep Chinese walls between the King's office as head of state of all the different countries where he is the head of state. So if he were to pick up the phone to anyone, it would be to Justin Trudeau as the Prime Minister of Canada.
And again, it's very, very difficult. We're in completely uncharted waters here with the way Donald Trump's behaving. But it seems very unlikely, stroke inconceivable, that King Charles would actually make any public intervention on this, given how close we are to the Americans as well as to the Canadians.
Well, if he did make any public intervention, you're right, it would be very carefully scripted. But speaking as King of Canada, he would be advised by the government of Canada. That's how it works. And so it's just conceivable that the Canadian government might plead with him because it's known that Trump is very impressed by the royal family. The Canadian government might plead with him to make some kind of intervention. I think the palace would act very cautiously. But if any intervention were made, it would be on the advice of the government of Canada.
Well, you're going exactly expertly where I was hoping to go, which is that this is actually, the King's involvement is actually one of the few cards that the Canadians have they could conceivably play beyond their aggressive response on tariffs themselves. And yet, for the British government, it's particularly difficult because we are trying to maintain very good relationships with Donald Trump at the same time.
Indeed. And it would only become awkward, I think, for the palace if the interests of the British government and the Canadian government appeared to be at odds with each other. If there were some conflict between the objectives of the British government and Keir Starmer trying to protect our trade position and that of Trudeau in Canada trying to protect the Canadian position. And just occasionally in the past, there have been occasions when the interests of the two governments have been in conflict and the monarchy has been caught in the middle. I can give you an example if we have time.
We don't. I was going to say, let's hope this doesn't happen this time. But Professor Hazell, thank you very much indeed for talking to LBC tonight.